A 1, a 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can be serious or silly when you paint with Robin and Lilly. Mama's a teacher, I just write songs. Come and join along.
Hi, I'm Robin.
And I'm Lilly.
And we are Robin and Lilly.
For the love of painting. Welcome.
Hi, we're glad you joined us, and this is our third video.
Yes, we are in February, so fittingly, we're going to be painting a rainboot today. But we're also looking forward to spring, so we've added in some flowers as well.
Yeah, it's always really wet and rainy in Kentucky.
Yeah, it is.
So, but we're excited about spring, and we're excited about our tulip bouquet.
So,
all right, so let's talk about what we have on our table. We have 2 glasses of water each. That is so 1 glass of water can be used for cleaning our brush. Once you've loaded your brush and you need to change colors or really clean that brush, we'll keep 1 glass of water just for cleaning the brush. The second glass of water is really for painting with. When you're painting with water, we add water often to our watercolor paper, just clean water, or we add drops of water to the color as we paint. So you want to have a clean glass of water on hand as well.
So what about the tape?
Oh yeah, the tape. So we're using a painter's tape. This is a blue painter's tape. It has less sticky on the back of it, which means you can peel it up carefully, and really there's no damage to your painting or your paper when you're finished and you peel that away. But you do want to tape down for the most part, especially when you're using a small piece of paper like this. This is a 5x7. As we paint and add water and it absorbs that moisture, it will get warbly. Warbly.
I like this a little bit.
Yeah, so it's good to tape it down and just kind of keep it in place, and it stays a little flatter even though we're adding the water.
Wonderful. What kind of paint are we using?
This is a Winsor & Newton watercolor paint. We really like the quality of this paint, and this is the paint that you will get if you get a kit. And each kit comes with a small palette that has just the right colors for that painting.
So talking about our kits, if you don't have your own watercolor supplies at home, Robin and Lilly offers our own paint kits and paint kit subscriptions. So you will get your own watercolor paper with starter lines, as we see here, and also a blank sheet of watercolor paper. You'll get a drawing pencil, a student watercolor paintbrush, like she mentioned, the paints here, as well as a step-by-step card with the illustrations of a 4-step how-to for the painting.
It's like a full color postcard that really helps you step by step. In addition to our video, the step-by-step card is a resource and a reference for you.
That's right, and our videos are all completely free, but if you are interested in purchasing a paint kit, visit artbarnstudios.com for more information on that.
Yeah, and you can buy a single kit or a subscription. A 3-month or 6-month subscription. So,
that's right.
So we hope you'll check that out on our website. Okay, let's get started.
All right.
So Lilly mentioned that our paper has starter lines, and yes, in the kit you would get one of your watercolor papers would have starter lines, and the other one is a clean piece of paper. This is cold press paper. So what that means is it has some texture to it. So cold press watercolor paper has a little bit of tooth and a little bit of texture. You can also work on hot press watercolor paper, which is a very smooth sheen of paper. Of course, you get completely different effects when you watercolor paint on those papers. My preference is the texture of the cold press, and that's what we're using here. And that is what you'll get in your kit if you order a kit.
Okay, how do we get started?
Okay, so if you're drawing at home with us, if you have a starter kit, you may want to begin with the starter lines. If you're confident in your drawing skills and you don't feel like you need that, then you just go right ahead and draw your own version of this composition with the boot and the tulips. Yeah, let's get started. We're going to start by drawing the tulips. So you can see here there are 4 tulips, and on our starter kit, or our starter lines, we have the sort of the bottom half of the tulips. So you can start anywhere you like, but just look at the shape of each petal and the texture and sort of the contour or the outside lines of those shapes, and you can begin drawing whenever you're ready. So I'm just going to start on this side and kind of work over. But you can do it any order that you like. Be sure and look for the texture at the edge of each tulip petal. This little petal that I'm about to draw here on this side is actually bending over a bit and kind of reaching out. When we start painting, we'll be using values. So we'll have a lighter red and a medium red and a darker red, which begins to show shadow and depth and three-dimensional qualities. I said red, but this is actually a beautiful color called Alizarin Crimson, one of my favorite colors. So, and if you order the kit, that's what you'll get, the Alizarin Crimson.
Mama always astounds me with her knowledge of specific colors and all of their names. It's actually really cool when you think about it. I loved learning about colors as a kid.
And we're not using my favorite, which is cerulean blue, my favorite color in the whole world. And I also love saying cerulean blue. But alizarin crimson is good too. You can take your time, and one of the great things about using video as an instruction tool is you can stop, you can pause, you can rewind. You can rewind 3 or 4 or 5 times until you get it just right. How are you doing? Oh, beautiful. I love that every drawing, every painting, no matter how hard you try to copy someone else, and maybe you don't want to copy as much as just have your own expression, but they're always different.
Yeah.
And that's really the beauty of what we're doing. Even though you're learning from us and painting with us, we don't want you to try and copy specifically what we're doing. We hope that you'll create your own ideas and your own way of expressing with line and color.
My paintings always end up very different from my mom's, and that's all right. We're very different artists.
And Lily is a painter, but she typically doesn't paint with watercolor. So
Yeah, that's true.
this is a new process here, but Lily paints with acrylic paints in a very abstract, bold, beautiful way. Very different from what we're doing here. Lily, do you want to tell them where they can find your paintings online?
Yes, artbarnstudios.com. Yet again, that is our family's site for our business as a whole. Art Barn Studios includes the studio in the barn where we are now, and also our wood studio. So both of our painting portfolios, actually a small amount of your portfolio is really up there, but a good chunk of mine is on the site, and then also more information about our wood studio.
Yeah.
So
Check it out. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so we have both finished drawing our tulips, just sort of the outline or the contour of those petals. Now, when you look at the bouquet, it's kind of complicated, so don't get overwhelmed. We'll go through that kind of layer by layer. We'll draw each green leaf. I guess those are long leaves, and stems. We'll work through that together. But let's hop down to the boot. We'll go ahead and get that outside contour of the boot so we have that complete boot in place. So if you're using the starter lines, there are a good portion of the boot is already there. So we're just going to connect those lines really for the most part. I'm going to come down on the back side of my boot. Okay, so I'm going to continue adding the sole of my boot with just a single line that runs kind of parallel to the bottom of the boot. We do want want to draw very lightly the shape of these highlights. These light gray areas are reflections of light on what is kind of a shiny, maybe even a wet boot. So we're going to outline these shapes. Be really loose with that. These are reflections of light. They're never going to be the same twice. So you can draw those shapes very loosely.
I know it's only February, but this morning I woke up and I heard birds in the woods. It was like the first time in a while. It made me very happy because, man, am I ready for spring.
Always at this time of the year, I'm so ready for spring. It's kind of hard to see under the black paint, but there are 3 seams on this boot. One is here on the heel, one is here down the front, and one is here just on the toe. So I'm going to draw those 3 lines as well. You'll notice here at the very top line of my boot, I left a tiny little dip, which is actually going to become this flower. Also, you'll want to notice that this first tulip leaf crosses onto the top or in front of that boot. So be sure and bring that, we'll go ahead and draw that first leaf. Be sure and bring the point of that right up in front of the boot. So I've drawn this leaf, and I'm going to go ahead and draw one more that comes off right here. And then I'm going to stop with the leaves for a moment and go back to the tulip stems. So we kind of establish the tulips fully before we start drawing all of the leaves. Okay, so each tulip has one stem that goes down into the boot. So we'll do a stem for each. I'm also going to go ahead and draw this flower because I've left that space for it. It's just a really simple little summer flower, almost like a tiny daisy.
I see here that you have some flowers in this version in front of the stems even, so I'm going to go ahead and copy what she has here. Before I do this stem, I'm going to do a little flower.
And that's a good idea. You can see that I drew the stem, and I was thinking, hey, I'm going to have to erase a little spot right there to draw that flower that's going to be in front. And you can do it either way. You can sketch loosely, you can draw crisp contour lines. And we are going to be sort of studying the layers, what's in front, what's in the middle, and what's in the back as we draw. That three-dimensional quality, that depth is what really adds a lot. It just adds quality to your painting. So we do want to talk about and learn about that three-dimensional quality while we're working. So here's that little flower that is in front. I'm just going to draw it, even though you can see the stem through it. Once I paint it, you won't be able to see those lines. Okay, I've got my 4 stems. Yep, you do too. Okay, so let's draw. You can take your time. You can even add different flowers. But I think now I'm going to go ahead and draw each of these smaller flowers just to put them in position, and then we'll start adding the green leaves from what's in the front and then what's in the back. And remember, your drawing does not have to be just like ours. You can reposition things, change your composition. The word composition refers to how you fill up your page, your paper, your canvas, anything that you're filling up, even a sculpture that's three-dimensional and you can look at it from all sides. It has a composition to it. And when you're drawing or painting, referring to the composition is literally talking about how you fill up that page. So you can change your composition, you can move things around, you can add extra flowers.
And we want to see how you choose to fill up your composition. So if you're following along with us today, please send in your art. In fact, if you'd allow us, we'd even love to post it on our social media. Which reminds me, check us out on Facebook and Instagram as well, Art Barn Studios.
And we've already got several examples of people who are following along and painting with us. And we're really excited. Soon we'll be posting some of those. And we're so happy that they've given us permission to share. So
that's right.
Send us what you're doing. We'd love to share. Each little flower or stem or leaf that you draw, make sure it is coming from inside the boot. So even these little red flowers here and these tiny little stems, you can see where it actually, there's a place where it enters the boot. So everything has to come out of that boot. And this is so much fun. I love doing this. Such a simple task, and it brings me so much joy.
And you may or may not notice that this isn't exactly a specific flower, right? This is partially imagination. So take creative liberties. Stray from the flowers that we have here if you'd like. You can kind of make it up however which way you'd like.
Yeah, I don't know what those little red flowers are,
but they're cute and I love them.
Also, there are several little yellow flowers. I think those little shapes probably represent a real flower. I'm just not sure what it is.
Sure. You know, the abstract artist in me loves that kind of stuff.
Do look for areas where things overlap. A good example is even this tiny little area right here. This is going to be a little yellow flower, but this little yellow flower has one thin stem that goes behind, so it stops and restarts. So you might think that the three-dimensional quality is difficult, but it's really not. If you just look closely at those little details and notice that there are places where your lines need to stop and restart when something's behind something else.
You think I can start in my grassy leaves?
Yes, I'm going to do this one too. Probably of this entire painting, the hardest two parts to draw are these two front leaves here and here, because you see the underside, you see where it bends, and then you see what would be the top layer of that leaf. And so if that's difficult for you, just follow along right now. I'm going to draw this leaf. So I'm going to start with this triangle shape right here, which is actually the underside or the shadowed side. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to curve up and then back down, still inside the boot. It's a little bit of a stretched triangle. From the top of this, what is right here, you're just going to keep going, and there's a little dip right here because that leaf has a curve to it. So we're going to give that a dip. And this line is the same edge all the way down. So this line on top of your little bent triangle is the same line. Just keep going and give it a bit of a curve. And then it meets up here with this top part of the leaf. So just like that, you've drawn something that is quite three-dimensional.
Or, like me, you maybe added a little too many flowers in that general area and don't have enough room for this piece of grass.
It's a little messy.
I need to go back
That's
and
okay.
erase. So maybe something else to have on hand is an eraser.
We didn't even bring erasers with
There's
us.
one right there, though.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to use this ugly pencil.
There
Sorry.
you go. Maybe that's something we should add to the kits. I have these
Erasers.
beautiful
Oh,
tiny
that's a
little
great
erasers.
idea.
We could add those to the kits.
We are growing and learning as we go how to make our kits better, how to even make our videos better, and we would also like your suggestions too. So if you have any ideas for what you'd like to see us do here, let us know.
Like we said in the intro, this is our third video and we've already made a lot of changes. We've upgraded our paper quality, we've upgraded our watercolor paint quality. We even changed to better drawing pencils, a very specific drawing pencil. So I think as we go, things will just get better and better, and we hope that you'll follow along with us as we change and grow. All right, so what I'm noticing now, I have my tulips, I have my stems, I have all my little flowers. Well, actually I'm missing a couple of little yellow ones. I will go and add those tiny yellow ones. I've got my leaves that are coming forward, and really what's left are those leaves that are in the background. They're behind the tulips and they're overlapping each other. So just take one leaf at a time. Just one leaf at a time. I'm going to start with this one that falls behind the tulip and it falls behind the little daisy. And you can see here my line's going to come out from behind that tulip. This little piece up here is attached to this leaf down here. So I'm going to start at the boot and go all the way up and behind my tulip, pause that line, come up here and start again. And I'm still connecting. That same line becomes one leaf. And I'm going to add those little yellow flowers that are even in front of that.
Boy, that does start to get complicated without the paint. Once we start laying the paint and adding that value, everything's going to start to pop and separate itself. But it does look like just a lot of lines.
It does.
Right
It
now.
looks like sort of a chaos of lines. If it confuses you terribly, then take your time. One leaf at a time. Pause the video, go back and rewind. Erase if you have to and start again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't be hard on yourself. This is fun.
Or simplify if that's what you'd prefer to do. I'm going to jump over to this side, kind of fill in.
Yeah, let's count them so that to maybe help sort them for you. So we have 1, 2, 3. This one that goes behind the tulip would be 4. And this is a 5th one. This one is 6 and 7 and 8. Now you could have 10 or 15 or 3. It doesn't matter. But if you're trying to copy what we've done, there are 8.
All right. I'll go ahead and bring this one up here. And I'm just going to leave it this top triangular piece that's so chaotic down here for me, I'm not even going to try and add that. I don't think I can add that bottom half, actually. I think my long leaf here is kind of covering it up anyway.
Yeah. Once you get into painting the shadows and the highlights, you know, it'll give that texture and that three-dimensional quality that we're looking for. right, I think I have mine.
You do? I like it.
I do too. I love yours. Okay, we are ready to begin painting. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to use our clean water, load our brush with water, and just let it drip onto that Alizarin Crimson. Give it a little bit of moisture and move it around on your palette.
Okay, so we got our clean water, but now as we add more water to our palette, we use our dirty water, right?
Yeah, that's probably best because there's a lot of paint on my brush
Already,
and
right.
I don't want to get this water too dirty. So
Contaminate it.
yeah. The more water you add, the thinner or lighter that color becomes. So I'm going to add even more water, and as I move across, I'm going to let that thin out a bit. And you can begin to see how you can paint with a darker, richer color or a lighter, thinner color. One technique that we use with watercolor is a layering technique called glazing. It doesn't really have anything to do with glaze. When I was a young college student and I took a watercolor class and I first heard of the technique glazing, I immediately thought of my ceramics class and how you add glaze. And I thought, what are we going to do? We're going to put some crazy coat of glaze on top of our watercolor painting. But that wasn't it at all. Glazing in watercolor refers to layers of color. So if you let one layer of color dry, and then you come back, and even using the same color, if you put another layer, each layer adds depth to the color and a richness to the color. And that process of layering the colors, sometimes the same color, sometimes different colors that are going to blend, that process is called glazing. So what we're going to do with our tulips is start with just the foundation of a simple, plain, light pink. Initially, you don't have to try and create those depths, the darker colors, and the value. Initially, we're just going to paint a solid light pink on each tulip.
Okay.
Now, here's a good point to talk about painting wet on wet or wet on dry. And you can try both techniques. So wet on wet is when you layer, I'm going to clean my brush really well. I'm going to grab clean water. To paint wet on wet is when you first layer pure water. You paint a tulip with just water, and then that paper is wet and you add the color to that, and that's painting wet on wet. So let's do our first one so that we can try a little bit of both. Let's do our first one, wet on wet. When you're painting with clear water, it can be hard to see, and I usually just kind of bend and move until I see the reflection of the light, and that helps me see the clear water. Okay, so my first tulip is painted with pure water. One of the most fun parts of painting with watercolor paint is letting the paint move and flow and bleed and blend and do its own thing. That is a really loose style of painting, and it's just one of the most fun parts of painting with watercolor. So now I'm just going to drip some color onto that and watch it bleed and move a little bit. So watercolor paints, they spread and they smooth out. So if I leave this just like it is as it begins to absorb into the paper and it begins to dry, it will bleed right to the edge of that wetness. So it's one way of maintaining control as well as letting the paint bleed and move and kind of be really loose and out of control. One way of maintaining control is knowing that your color is going to stay. When it hits that dry paper, it will stop. So you can have a crisp edge easily when you paint wet on wet. I'm going to let that one dry. I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to paint the second tulip wet on dry paper. Not a whole lot of difference to that except for the quality of the paint as you lay it down. So I'm going to load my brush with my Alizarin Crimson, and I'm just going to paint right on the dry paper. You can see it looks quite different and it feels different, and there's really a different technique. Now I'm going to add more water so that it smooths out that color. So what did you think about the difference between the wet on wet and the wet on dry?
I think I prefer wet on dry. I like the way that I can control the color in the water more wet on dry.
Okay.
What's your favorite?
I think I prefer the wet on wet. You can't see why in these two tulips so much, but in other areas, maybe when we're painting the boot and we kind of are more playful with the wet paint in the wet paint on the paper, or the wet water on the paper, you'll see why I feel like that's more playful, and that's probably my favorite way of doing it. So as we finish out the tulips, you can choose which style that you want to use. Beautiful. Now let's look at our finished painting. You can see that there's a richer, deeper Alizarin Crimson in between the petals, sort of behind the petals where there are shadows, especially in the center of our tulip where there's not much light getting into that piece inside, so you've got the darker colors there. Right now, if we try and add those darker colors into our wet paint, it's going to move and bleed, and we're not going to be able to control it. So we're going to let these dry with that first layer of glaze or color, so we can work on other parts of our painting while our tulips dry. And then we'll come back with that glazing technique and add more of our Alizarin Crimson in layers on those tulips until we get the value or the light and the dark quality that we're looking for. When you choose another part of your painting to work into, you need to think about what parts of your paper are wet and what parts are dry. I could not, for example, right now take my green and paint this leaf that touches the wet paper, because as soon as those two colors that are wet touch each other, they're just going to bleed together and make a brown, a muddy color. So each area has to be completely dry if the colors are going to touch. So I think I'll come down and start with the boot, which isn't going to touch or interfere with the drying tulips. Okay. Our boot is this is just a rich black. So we're going to add a little water. Use your dirtier water to clean your brush. Then come back and get some really clean water to moisten up. You can almost not tell which is the green and which is the black. This is the black right here.
Glad I got it. And so like you mentioned before, adding more water dilutes the color. So in this case, we'll be working with light grays. And if you can tell, in this finished painting, it almost looks a little blue even.
Actually, I believe that when I painted this original, I used a Payne's Gray, which is very similar to black. I'm remembering this as you said that, which I'm glad you pointed it out. I think we'll find that when we paint in just a minute. This is a rich black. We ordered a new set of paints, the Windsor and Newton.
So this will dry a little different.
I think it's going to have a different color. The
Cool.
Payne's Gray has a tint of blue, or a more of a gray blue. And the rich black has more of a rich black. So we'll see how that's a little bit different. But we do want to dilute, and we want to put our first layer of the boot down with a very light gray.
I missed a little reflection. I'm going to get that first.
Now I'm painting right over my reflections because they are going to be a very light gray.
Okay.
So my whole boot is really going to be mostly that light reflection color, the lightest gray, until I come back with layers of color that create the richness and the darker shadowy areas. I'm noticing with the rich black that it settles into the texture of the cold pressed paper. So you can actually see the texture, and I really like that. This is what I would call my layer of just a light gray. I like it. Almost. I'm actually going to show you that you can remove paint. So this reflection right here, which is much lighter than my final boot color, I'm going to remove some of that paint if I dry my brush, just tap it on my cloth, and I touch this wet area. You can watch and see how it literally picks up the paint. Look at that. It's like erasing. So that's kind of an amazing technique. You might need to use it all the time in watercolor, where you can just dry your brush and drag it along the area, and it picks it up like an eraser. And it gives you a slightly lighter hue. I want to add here as well that there is no white in watercolor. White is an opaque color, so the only way that we can really use white in watercolor painting is to leave the paper white. Now sometimes you can come back on top of a finished dry watercolor painting and add a bit of white. It's called gouache. It's a water soluble paint. The gouache is, but it's also opaque. So if you painted with white gouache on top, you would be adding more of an opaque bit of white. So you could do that, but the best technique for using white in a watercolor painting is to leave the paper white, and that shows through. There isn't any actual white on my boot, so I'm not trying to do that, but I'm still picking up some of my color to make my reflections a little bit lighter. Right. I'm going to let my boot dry. Looks good. If you're impatient, you can take a regular blow dryer and put it on a low, warm speed and just gently dry your paint. It works. I don't think we have to do it here today, but if you need to take a break and use a blow dryer and dry your painting, it allows you to work a little faster because things get dry and you can move on. Okay, what do you think?
I think my tulips are almost dry completely. Yours are not, though.
That's because you said you like painting wet on dry, and so the paper absorbed more of your moist color, and it dried faster.
That's kind of cool to know.
Yeah, since mine was, and you can see this was the one I painted wet on dry, and it's nearly dry. The three that I painted wet on wet are still quite wet. There was just more water involved. Okay, so the one area I know I can work on without disturbing my wet tulips or my wet boot are all of these fun little flowers in between. My yellow ones and my little red ones and the little white dots. So I'm going to go ahead and paint those just because I can, because they're there. They're in front of the leaves and the texture that's and the shadow that's in the back. So none of those are touching, except for this tiny little one right here, but it's the white petals, so that's not going to hurt anything. So I'm going to go ahead and paint my yellow and my red tiny flowers. You might notice as well, even our little palettes, they don't have a lot of paint on them. Watercolor painting doesn't take a lot of paint. Just the tiniest little bit goes a long way in watercolor.
And if you order one of our paint kits, it's likely that these cards that you get with each individual kit will last you a lot longer than the 1 or 2 paintings that you could do with the paper we provide you. So this paint will last you a good while.
Yes, you could definitely do multiple paintings with this small palette. And each kit, each month, has a different painting and a different palette, a different set of colors. So you could easily collect several palettes and have multiple different colors to paint with over time.
Mm-hmm. It is one of our goals to eventually be able to offer different kinds of kits. Right now, we're just starting. We only have 1 kit available, really, and it contains the same contents every month for each new video. But eventually, we want to have a beginner's kit, an intermediate kit, and a professional kit, where you can choose what kind of contents you'd like, the level of quality, whether you'd like professional pencils and brushes and paints, or if you're just starting out and you'd prefer more of the student quality. Ultimately, we want you to be able to choose and kind of pick your own kit. So
go ahead and tell us about that. Go ahead and tell us, hey, I like what you're doing, or I don't, and I would love to see this, or I would love to have your kits include this,
yes.
Or just like we just decided a moment ago, we're probably going to start including little erasers. I hadn't thought about that, but I think we'll start including erasers in the kit. So give us suggestions. Tell us what you like. We've got a lot of growth ahead of us. And
we're excited about that.
Yeah,
we're not
definitely.
intimidated by that. We love to grow, and we're going to keep changing, so we're flexible.
And I love this Alizarin Crimson. I'm adding it in a bold, deep, rich color on these tiny little flowers. It's very different from what we've done on the tulips so far, but it just adds such a punch.
It does.
And a beautiful color.
Mm-hmm.
So beautiful. I love that color.
Yeah, I love that color a lot.
Again, talking about the white, some of my daisies, the petals are white, and that's just paper. I'm not even going to touch those petals. No paint on the white petals. Our tulips are mostly dry, so we can begin to paint into them and add a new layer of glaze and add some dark alizarin crimson for our shadows. So let's do that. I'm going to find these darker areas deep inside the tulip, or where one leaf overlaps another and it creates a shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and find those darker areas for the Alizarin Crimson and paint in those first. To give a three-dimensional quality, the shape and contour of each tulip, you really need value. So you need areas that are light, that typically are reflecting light, and you need areas that are in shadow, a medium color of shadow, and then you need areas that are really rich and dark, where shadow lies. So you can see here we've done that. And these lighter areas, the edges and tips and parts of the petals that come forward that are really reflecting the light, they are a lighter pink. And then behind each layer of petal, there's a little bit of a darker color as that creates shadow. And then in the darkest areas, and I want to point out where one tulip overlaps the other, the tulip that's in the back is going to have the shadow. So this tulip on the far right is slightly behind this second tulip. So I'm going to add even a little bit more of this rich alizarin crimson to add to that shadow effect and the three-dimensional quality of layering those tulips. Right, I like it. Looks beautiful, Lily.
As always, I like how ours are different.
Let's do the same thing to the boot. So we're going to be thinking about the value, the lightest areas where light is reflecting, the medium tones, and then those darker, rich black shadows. So as I'm about to sort of finish up my boot, I'm really looking at those areas that I want to push that shadow and push the darkness to really create more value. So I'm looking at the seams, the edges of the boot that kind of curve back, under the leaf that comes forward in front of the boot, down here at the bottom where there's some shadow at the bottom of the heel. So look for those areas that you need to make darker.
All right, so our boot is still drying a little bit, but our flowers are looking good for the most part. Yeah, so we're gonna hop up to our leaves.
There are two ways to approach these leaves. We could do the same technique that we've used on the tulips and the boots, starting with a light green, or even a light yellow green, a thin light layer. That would be our first layer of glaze. You could take the opposite effect. You could look at those darkest areas and paint those first. It's really up to you, and different artists go about this in different ways. So there's a lot of freedom, a lot of individuality, and a lot of creativity. So I think just for fun, I'm going to approach the leaves from the opposite direction. I'm going to take my darkest greens and find those darkest areas where my leaves touch each other, where they fall behind the tulips, where they go into the boot. These are all places where you're going to find that darkest green. So I'm going to do that first. And I want to point out that, like we said, we've changed our paints. This painting I did a while ago, and these new paintings and these new palettes are our new Winsome and Newton paints. They're different colors, and that's okay. This is a much bluer green, much bluer than, say, what we've used here. But when you glaze and you layer, or when you simply blend on your palette, you can get a warmer yellowy green by adding yellow to that. And see that almost immediately becomes the same color that we've used there. So that's a mixture of our blue green and our yellow, and we get this warm spring green, which is mostly what we've used.
I like that a lot.
And that's even beautiful right there. It's just it's its own little beauty right there. Okay. These first two leaves that were in the front that bend forward, that we drew and we talked about, that underneath shadow, that's where I'm going to do my dark first, here and here. We know this is in shadow because the leaf is curling over itself. This leaf, the second one that we drew, it falls behind that first leaf. So I'm going to continue with a quite dark where each leaf goes behind another one. As you come down that leaf away from the shadow and more light is hitting the surface of the leaf, it's going to get lighter or warmer. So I'm going to start adding that yellow green as we come down away from the shadow. Oh, and look how beautiful that is. It blends on its own. It becomes its own beautiful color right on the paper.
Experimenting with the dark green shadow and the lighter green is a good opportunity to use wet on wet and see how it just naturally bleeds together.
And be thinking about, as warmth or light, maybe even sunlight in this case, is hitting those leaves, the warm light gives a yellow or a warm glow. The tops of these leaves are going to be much more warm and much more yellow than the cooler, darker, shadowy areas. As I begin to paint this green right up next to my red tulip, this is a good time to point out that that tulip is completely dry. If it were wet and I painted this green right up next to it, it would bleed right into the tulip. But you can see here that because the tulip is dry, and that paint is not going to go where the paper is dry. So I can paint with much more control right up next to that tulip.
This is kind of cool. So I have my green here behind this tulip, and I just kind of discovered that depending on how much paint and water I have here on this leaf, I can take my brush and move the shadow, move the bulk of the paint. If it was up here and I wanted it down here by the stem, I can literally just take that paint and move it where I want. That's pretty convenient.
One of the beauties of watercolor. I really like this darker blue-green that we're using as well. Even though I love our original painting, I'm really loving these colors. These two colors are so beautiful together. Don't be shy about adding yellow. It's never really going to be a pure yellow when it's mixing and blending with those greens, but it really adds warmth to your leaves. Okay, so let's be honest. When you're painting all of these overlapping leaves and stems and tiny stems for the flowers, it can get a little confusing. So don't stress about it. If you have darker colors and lighter colors and they blend together and they mix and match a little bit, all within that bouquet, ultimately it's going to look beautiful. It doesn't have to be perfect on every petal, perfect on every leaf. All the edges don't have to be crisp. You can drop water on there and let it bleed and just, it's going to be beautiful. These colors are beautiful. Your composition is beautiful. Your drawing is beautiful. So don't get stressed about these petals and leaves that overlap. I'm a little lost myself, but I'm just going to put some dark rich greens in there, and those will push back into the shadow, and I'm going to add a few edges of yellow and light green, and I'm going to be finished, and I'm not going to worry about it being perfect. I will will point out though that I have not painted the stems yet. I'm really working on those leaves. I'm leaving those 4 tulip stems for the end, and I'm going to add a lighter yellowy green so there is contrast there and they stand out against the darker, cooler green. I'm going to add a few strokes of really dark, cool green, and I want you to notice how immediately it creates depth. That contrast of the lighter colors versus the darker colors really adds a lot to any drawing and any painting. So I'm going to make a couple of dark green strokes, and I want you to notice how it really makes a difference in terms of shadow and depth. Welcome back if you took a break. We did. We took a break to let our paintings dry, and we're almost finished. I'm pretty excited. I think they look great.
I do too. You can totally see here how mine has bled through and run around, and it's completely done its own thing, and I don't even mind. I'll fix it as we go.
Well, you could fix it, or serendipity. I like the shadowy quality.
It does kind of look like a shadow.
Yeah, so the green bled into the red. We've talked about why that happens and when that happens. You know, I wouldn't mind if you were playful with more of the green and let it bleed in a shadowy way, you know, on some of the edges of the flowers, rather, especially this one that goes behind that one.
Sure.
And rather than trying to fix it,
kind of
let your shadows kind of bleed
elsewhere.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
cool.
Create more of that. It's
like
playful, and I like it too. So, and a mistake isn't always a bad thing.
We call that a happy accident or serendipity.
Yes, happens all the time in art. All the time. Okay, I know on my painting, what I have left to do is paint the stems of the tulips. I'm going to do a real yellowy green, much like you see in the warmer parts of my long leaves. Most of the leaves that are behind the tulips are much darker in shadow. So the stems, I'm going to give a very yellow or warm light green. The other thing I feel like I need to do to finish is come back into my boot. I want to make the edges a little more crisp and a little darker so that that really gives that bending backward, going around the edge of that boot, that darkness and that shadow. And the seams of my boot, I want to highlight those a little bit, and the edges between my sole down here. So I have just a little bit of detail and my stems, and then I think I'm going to be finished. What about you?
Yep, obviously I need to work on, if not cleaning this up, like you said, putting it elsewhere and kind of filling that into, what is the word you use to kind
balance?
of... Balance. That's the word. That's the word, to balance the composition there. But then, yeah, I need to go back to my boot as well. So,
okay, let's do it. Oh, see, I love that. You've actually added more there and there.
I did. I
I
really do
actually
like
like
that.
that.
It's kind of just like a reflection of the green off the palette a little bit.
And the shadow, it has color in it, which actually all shadows have color. We think of shadows as being black or gray, but in life, shadows have color. They have whatever color is around them. If it's a shadow of a tree, it's going to have greens and yellows and blues. It just depends. So shadows have color, and I really love what happened there.
Just gonna go back with my lines.
As we're wrapping it up, I do want to point out one more time, you can see a clear difference in the black that we used on these boots today and the black that I used on this boot a few weeks ago when I painted this one. This was a different paint. It was a Payne's Gray, which is a black, but it does have a bluer tint. And this is a real black, and there's quite a bit of a difference there.
Okay.
And you can notice that on your palette, if you get the kit, the tiny bit of paint that we started with, we've barely used any of that paint.
That's true. There's a lot of paint left there.
You could save this, it will dry. You can reconstitute it by adding just a little bit of water next time, and you can use it for several paintings.
Excellent.
All right.
Okay. Per usual, mine is much messier than my mom's. But that's okay. I love how pristine.
Controlled.
I guess controlled.
It's controlled.
It's a good way to. Mine is not controlled.
We've had this conversation, and
Over
we'll have
over.
it many more
I
times.
know. It's just who we are. That's all
I
right.
paint with more control, and I try not to. Sometimes I can be looser. Today I wasn't trying to be loose too much.
I do the opposite, though. I sometimes try to have more control, and it just doesn't happen the way that I planned.
But when
That's
you
all.
look up Lily's paintings on our website in her portfolio, her acrylic paintings, you will see exactly why. Her watercolor paintings have a different feel. Her acrylic paintings are gorgeous and abstract and colorful and playful, and she brings that to her watercolor as well. All right, I think we're done.
Excellent. So one more time, if you're interested in our Robin and Lily paint kits, visit our website, artbarnstudios.com. You can just purchase one kit individually, one at a time, as you'd like, or you could purchase a subscription, and that will include future video releases and future kits as well. So
3 months subscription or 6.
Or 6. Yep, that's right.
And yeah, we're so glad you joined us. I know we have a lot of fun. I hope you do too.
Let us know if you have any questions in the comments.
Yeah.
And we're excited to see you next time.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Blah. Time out. Have this sense that they can't hear me through the screen. You know, it's like I'm like constantly trying to keep their attention. I'm really intense the whole time.